You cannot, please guys, community, I hope you are hearing me. You cannot implement an ISO management system in the boardroom. Sitting in the boardroom and writing those procedures, you are setting yourself up for failure. You have to work with the people. When you do purchasing, you go and sit with the purchasing department. You make an appointment, you go sit with them, you go through their process. Whatever procedure you are writing, the people must tell you what they are doing. And then when now you just ISOize it, I always say that. When now you put it on a document, you give it a document name, document number, revisions, you make it nice for ISO. But the content is what is being done on the floor.
Hi guys, Litemba Kula here. Thank you for joining and watching this episode, whether it's on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, or any other platform. So today we have a guest that my EHS community had requested for via our LinkedIn poll, where you guys had requested us to bring someone who specializes in both ISO 14001 and ISO 45001. So today our guest is Portia Ngakane, who is an expert in implementing these two ISO standards. Stay tuned. Hope you enjoy. Of course. Hi Portia, thank you for joining and speaking to the community on this important subject, which is both ISO 14000 and ISO 45000. So I had a poll that I was running on LinkedIn where I asked the community to vote. So I gave them four options. First option was a guest speaking about ISO 14, ISO 45. Second option was environmental management. Third option was mining. Fourth option was legal compliance, EHS. By a landslide, more than 50% said ISO 14 and ISO 45000. This interview has a lot of people that are waiting for it. No pressure. So again, I say I thank you for taking the time to speak to us. A lot of people have questions about this topic, even myself. Even though I'm looking at a site that is ISO 14000 certified, there's a lot that I'm learning. So it'll be a great learning curve for myself and, of course, the greater community. Could you please tell the EHS community who you are?
Hi, Litemba, and hi, community. My name is Portia Ngakane. I've been in the ISO field since 2007. I now own my own company called SHEQ, GAUSHEQ, for safety, environment, health, and quality. I worked for international companies. That's where I got all the ISO exposure. I'm currently based in Gauteng, but I work in all provinces across the country, and I'm now starting to work even beyond South Africa. I love ISO. I love what I do. I enjoy what I do, and I'm very passionate about upskilling and giving information, especially to the young ones who are coming behind us, you know. So ISO is my baby. I do different ISO standards. I do ISO 14001 for environment. I do ISO 45001, which used to be OSHA's 18001. I do ISO 9001. I do ISO 22000. I do 27000 for information systems. So I've added to the portfolio. But yeah, my specialties are ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and ISO 45001. I did years back, and now that I'm 50 plus, I started with safety in 2007. Started with safety. I did safety management at UNISA, and I got a lot of experience from the company I worked with. And then from safety, we had to certify the business for 9001. Then I did TQM again with UNISA, where I got more knowledge about 9001. And then the last one was ISO 14001 environmental. So we were a team of 4, and we implemented all the 3 standards. That's where the passion and the knowledge came in.
So Portia, I think just as a basic, could you please tell us who and what is ISO?
Okay. ISO is an international body based in Switzerland, in Prague. It's a body that sits now and again. They have different committees. They call them TS committees, who write these standards and issue these standards to organizations to implement. So 14,001 looks at the environment. For an example, for ISO 14,001, the TS committee would have sat and looked at the environmental impacts and aspects and looked at how businesses or organizations need to take care of our environment. You know, we are slowly seeing global warming. So for 14,001, they will then write a standard to say, as an organization, for an example, what waste do you generate? And what do you do with your waste? How do you dispose of your waste? If there's hazardous waste, how do you handle your hazardous waste? And in your processes, in your activities, what are the aspects from your activities as an organization? And how do those aspects impact the environment? So we are slowly seeing now companies looking at their processes, looking at what they generate, looking at what can affect the environment negatively, and now putting mitigations and controls in play to make sure that their effect on the environment as a whole is very minimal. And it's quite exciting, because when I was still employed those years back, environmental was almost non-existent in the country. But because I was employed by an international company, we had to move that direction. So yeah, it's quite exciting that local companies are now slowly moving into taking care of the environment, making sure that their activities, their processes, their waste does not affect the environmental in a negative way. Same with ISO 45,001. That one is mainly for health and safety, occupational health and safety. So 45,001 looks at employees, their wellness, their safety, and their health. Companies, I do a lot of audits, and we find that concentration is more on the safety side, and yet it's occupational health and safety. The 45,001 standard guides organizations on how to take care of the health and safety of their employees. So that's basically a summary to say the ISO TS committees in Switzerland write these standards, publish them, and then whichever company wants to be certified gets certified for those standards. Yeah. So 14 is environment, 45 is health and safety, and usually 14 and 45 go together. Most companies will have an EHS system, which is environmental, health, and safety. Most companies do them together. Although locally we don't have, actually globally, we don't have a combined certification where you get certified for EHS. You still have to be certified for 14,001 for environment and 45,001 for health and safety. But companies usually put them together. We call them integrated systems, where we don't have to write separate policies. We can integrate the systems and write one document and refer to environmental and health and safety. But the certification is still separate.
I know you had touched a little bit on both, but I would like you to please maybe dig in a bit deeper as to what ISO 14,000 is. Maybe you can just briefly touch on the clauses. Yes, they are all important, but you've got the ones that speak to leadership, which is a big thing. A lot of people in the EHS industry struggle with getting management commitment. Maybe if you can touch on that clause and a few other ones that you think are crucial for an organization to ensure that they get the two certifications.
Sure. The main change now with the latest versions, with the ISO 14,001 2015 and the ISO 45,001 2018, the main change is both standards have 10 clauses. That was big for us, because previously one had so many clauses, one had so many clauses. And when we wanted to integrate, it was just a bit of a problem. So now both of them have 10 clauses. The first 3 clauses I usually don't talk to because they are more normative. They refer you to the vocabulary that they use in both 14 and 45. So the first 3 clauses we usually don't speak to. We start at clause 4. Clause 4 is the context of the organization. There, that's a very crucial one because then that feeds into other clauses throughout the standard. So clause 4, the context of the organization, speaks to the organization itself. What does the organization do? So you should be able to, to explain what the organization does. And then another big change that came in was the risks and the opportunity. So in 9001, we speak risks and opportunities. In 14,001, we speak aspects and impacts. And then in 45,001, we speak HIRA, hazard identification and risk assessment. It's all the same. It's just that in health and safety, we call it HIRA. In environmental, we call it aspects and impact. And in quality, we call it risks and opportunity. So when we define the context of the organization, we say, what does the organization do? What are your activities? And then in 14,001, then we say, how can your activities affect the environment? That's when now we start looking at the aspects and their impacts on the organization. An example there would be, what waste does the organization generate as and when you work? Coolant, oil, used oil. And maybe the organization has sumps. All organization has general waste. Then the standard says, how are you handling your waste as an organization? So the scope that you have defined under clause 4 as part of the context of the organization goes further in 14,001 to say, what waste do you generate for the company? Then you have to define all the waste that you generate. It can be general in the offices, it can be cardboard, paper, medical waste if you have a clinic, your mixed oil, maybe you have a wash bay, you have a sump. You look at all those things. And then how do you dispose of that waste? Your medical waste. Are you using an accredited company to collect and dispose of your medical waste? So it's very important, especially when you are ISO 14,001 certified. You define your waste as per your activity. You define how you dispose of your waste. And if it's hazardous waste, then it has to be handled in a certain way. You can't throw your battery, for an example, in a general waste bin. Batteries are hazardous. They have to be treated in a certain way. If you are changing your lighting in the factory from fluorescent to LED, you can't take those fluorescent tubes and throw them in the general waste. They have lead. They are hazardous. So there is a certain way you must handle hazardous waste. You must get, if you are using an external company, that external company must issue you with safe disposal certificate to confirm that your waste has been disposed of in a legal way. And then comes now legal requirement. There's a lot of legal requirements in ISO 14,001 and in ISO 45,001. That's another important clause. What legal requirements based on environmental are applicable to the business? It can be handling your hazardous waste, like I've just said. It can be, let's say it's a construction company, you're constructing a road next to a dam or a stream of water. There's legal from the Department of Water and Sanitation. There's legal requirements that you have to make sure that when you are constructing that road as a contractor, you don't contaminate the dam. I've done a lot of audits in the Eastern Cape where there were road constructions right next to one in the communities because the roads are going via the communities, and the roads are next to a river. And because it's rural areas, there is livestock, there is cattle, there is cows moving and drinking that water. And when we audit, then we look at those things, that are your activities not contaminating this river or this dam or this stream as you are busy with your construction work. So there you have to now look at the legal requirement as a construction company of what you need to comply with as you are busy constructing your activity. So there's a lot of legal. The Constitution speaks to the environment. The Constitution says every person in our country has a right to a clean and safe environment. So you as the business, as you are going on a daily basis with your activity, how are you making sure that the communities around you and the community in your business, your employees, are complying to the environmental requirement? Usually, when it comes to legal, because legal is so broad, and companies, we don't have that expertise to make sure that we've covered all the legal requirements. Usually, we will call in a legal person, and there are legal people in EHS, in environmental health and safety, who can then come, look at your activities, and then compile a legal register to say you need to make sure that you comply to clause this of the Constitution, you comply to clause this of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, you comply to clause this of the Water and Sanitation, so that they will go through the whole organization and identify what laws or legal regulations are applicable to you. And then as an EHS person, then you need to make sure that the organization complies to those legal requirements. Same with health and safety. Health and safety, we also come and look at your activities as an organization, and then we say, because also there is legal requirements in health and safety, then based on the activities of the business, then we are able to say this law is applicable to your business. This law is applicable to your business. Then the EHS person must make sure that the company and the community, especially if you are working in community, because that's where things go wrong. We only concentrate on the internal business. And then when we are working outside the business, like the example I gave earlier of construction on a road in a community, then we don't take community into account with whatever activity we are busy with. So it's very important, firstly, for the EHS person to understand the legal regulations and the acts that are applicable to their activity, and then make sure that there is compliance to those legal requirements. That's the legal part of it. So the legal part is quite big on both environmental and on occupational health and safety. The best thing to monitor your legal compliance is to have a legal register. Have a legal register put in for you, but also be careful that when the laws change, because they do, when regulations change, then your legal register is changed as well. So somebody should monitor that. Are you working with a current law? Are you working with a current regulation? So somebody should, because when we come into audit, we look at your legal register and then we say, there was a change in the hazardous chemical regulation. How have you, because I see you're still using the old one, and yet there was a change. So it's very important that once your legal register is compiled, then there is monitoring of the changes in the law, and your legal register is changed, and the changes are communicated to the relevant people. So legal is quite big in both 14,001 and in 45,001. And when we audit, we zoom into legal, because there's usually a gap there where companies don't update the law. I know last year there was a change in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and companies still have not done the change. So yeah, once you have a legal register, then please make sure that it's updated. As and when there's a change in the regulation, make sure that your laws are also up to date and you are doing what the government wants you to currently. So legal, that's the legal clause. And then we've spoken to risk assessments. The 14,001 standard speaks to aspects and impact. What does the organization do and how do your activity impact on the environment? So it's basic aspects and impacts are basically risk assessment, but in the environmental side of things. So we look at that as well. You have to define what aspect your activities form and how you mitigate or you control their impact on the environment. Same with health and safety. We look at the risks. What risks do your activities have? How can they negatively impact on your employee? We identify the hazards, and then from the hazard, we identify the risk, and then we mitigate the risk. We put controls, we write procedures, we write safe working instructions, we do safety talks, we provide PPE, we provide training. All those things are now mitigations of the risk that you have identified. And then another crucial clause in both standards, which is new in the 2015 environmental standard and the 2018 occupational health and safety standard, is leadership, clause 5. We never had leadership in the previous standard. Since I started donkey years ago, we never had something that was speaking directly to leadership. Now clause 5 says, Mr. MD and Mr. Top Management, what is your role in this whole ISO that you want your organization to be certified for? How do you support the organization? How do you support the quality manager or the environmental manager or the HSE department as the MD of the organization? What is your support? It could be training. It could be making resources available. It could be appointing competent people to maintain the systems. It could be, if it's a painting company, for an example, on the environmental side, it could be making sure that we use water-based paint instead of that hard paint, which is more hazardous than water-based paint. So now these standards force leadership to be part of this ISO. And we were very excited when we saw that, because some of us who've been in this field forever, we had no leadership support. The MD would just sign the policy, you hang the policy at reception, and that was it for them. Anything environmental, speak to Portia. Anything health and safety, speak to Portia. Or speak to the HSE department, speak to the SHEQ department. Their involvement was very, very little. And I think the ISO body saw that there's very little management involvement and commitment in the ISO system. Hence now the leadership clause, in such a way that now when we audit, immediately after the opening meeting, we sit with the MD. We audit the MD on clause 5. Before we go down to the SHEQ department and we do operations, we sit with leadership and we ask them, how do you support the organization in this ISO management system that you've implemented? Okay, they'll say they've written the quality policy, but it doesn't end there. What resources have you made available to make sure that the systems are properly maintained? That's also part of support. Have you set your environmental objectives and targets? That also falls under leadership, under clause 5. What objectives have you set on the environmental side of things? That's all high-level interviews with the MD or with top management. And then once we've looked at objectives and targets, and then we look at the roles and responsibility, have you appointed people to be responsible? Who is in this role? Who leads the environmental side in the business? Who leads the ISO 45001 side in the business? Are they competent? Have they been trained? And that's when then we confirm that with HR, where we verify the certificate and all those things. So clause 5 was big to us because it was never there before. And anything environmental, anything health and safety, the questions would be thrown to the environmental department or the HSE department. Now top management has to know what's going on. When there's injury, when there's lost time, when there's accidents, when there's damage to property, now top management has to know those things. And in most companies, when they have their monthly management meeting, they give a slot to SHEQ so that you update them on what is happening. We had a lost time accident. This was the cause. We did the root cause analysis. This is what caused the accident. This is how we're correcting it. And this is the corrective action that we have now implemented to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So leadership plays a big part. They have to be educated. They have to understand what is going on. They have to know because they get interviewed during the audit. So they have to know now what's happening. And they must be able to give us answers when we audit them. And then we go to incidents and accidents on the health and safety side in 45. And then we go to incidences in 14,001. It's the same. Are you recording your environmental incident? When there is an oil spill on your site, is that recorded? Do you have spill kits? Do you have sumps? How do you clean your sumps? How often do you clean your sumps? What happens to that waste? Because remember, even if we outsource that service to a contract, we are still liable from the environmental side as a company that has generated that waste. So you, the originator of that waste, you are liable for the disposal of that waste. You can't move that risk to the company or the outsourced service. No, you are still liable. So if the Department of Environmental Affairs finds your waste somewhere where it shouldn't be, and they can trace it back to your organization, you are liable as a company. I'll give you an example. When I was still employed, the Department of Environmental Affairs came and visited us, and one of the companies on the road was contaminating a river that was very close to the company. And Environmental Affairs audited all the company on that road. They wanted to see this. I think there was about 8-9 companies on that road, and they audited all of us. And eventually they were able to trace the waste back to the company that was contaminating. And those people were fined millions of rand. So, there's a way that they can, I don't know how the guy laughed at me when I said, so how did you trace the waste back to company X? He just laughed at me and he said, no, we were able to. Probably because we have permits, of hazardous chemicals that we handle. And I think they could trace back to the permits, who has permit for this waste, because that water was obviously tested and they could see what chemicals were in that water. So they were able to trace it back to that company. And they were fined millions of rands. They were in the papers. It was a big thing. Because now when it moves to the media, now it's your reputation. Your reputation can be very negatively affected. You can lose clients. So what I'm trying to say is you cannot outsource that. When we say from cradle to grave, we say you, the generator of that waste, you are liable. You are in charge of that waste. Whether you're outsourcing the service, at the end of the day, if anything wrong goes with that waste, you are still liable for that waste. I'll give you another example. So what I'm saying is, on the environmental side, on 14,001, cradle to grave, you are in charge of your waste until. So you cannot transfer that risk to a third party. No, you, the generator of the waste, in charge of the waste, where it is disposed of. Even if you get disposal certificate, you are still in charge of your waste. When I was audited, I remember an auditor saying to me, have you followed these guys when they come to to collect this waste to see where your waste goes? I never used to do that until that audit. Now and again, I would drive behind them without them knowing that I'm following them to see where they are taking the waste. So that's on the environmental side. Yeah, so especially now that environment is slowly picking up in South Africa, these are the things we need to be aware of. These are the things that sometimes they don't even say, they don't even tell you in the training. Even if you have outsourced the service, you are still in control. You are still in charge. In 9001, there's a clause that says you, the organization, must have control of whatever company you are working with. And then when I come and audit you and you say to me, company Z collects your waste, and here is the safe disposal certificate, you are happy with that, then I go further and say, is that company certified to handle hazardous waste? You must have those certificates. Is that company allowed to dispose at that landfill site? There's a big problem with landfill sites currently. Our sites are full. Sites are closing down. So whatever company is handling your waste, you must make sure that they have a permit to use whatever landfill site they are disposing your waste at. That's the environmental side of it. And then for both standards, again, there's what we call the PDCA cycle, which is the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. It's applicable to all ISO standards. So you plan what needs to be done. Plan is P in the PDCA cycle. And then once you have planned, then you do. So in case of health and safety of ISO 45001, where is the planning? When you do risk assessment, you are planning that should there be an injury, this is how you are going to handle your injury on site. Should you need to outsource a service, you are planning how do we control this outsourced service? What do we want from the company that we are outsourcing to? Their registration, their accreditation, if they are accredited, the competence of the people you are working with, who will be working with your organization. So you collect all that information. That's all part of planning. And then once you've planned, then you do what needs to be done. If it's production, you produce what needs to be produced. You do the activities of the business. And then after D, then it's the C, it's the check. Now you check. We have internal audits. Your certification body comes in to audit you. You have checklists in ISO 14001 and in ISO 45001. You have checklists. That's also part of checking. You go to where you store your chemicals, maybe once a week on a Friday. You check. Are the gas bottles changed? It's checking, tick yes. And empty cylinders separated, you tick yes. Do you have enough banding so that should there be a spill, then it doesn't contaminate the soil? Check yes. So checklists are also a big part of the C in the PDCA cycle, which is check. There's different ways. Your customers come and audit you. That's also part of checking. They are checking that, are you doing things? Are you complying to their requirements? And are you doing things right? When I was still employed as well, especially with multinational, when we go to do supplier audits, what we call supplier audit, and the audit report is not good, they are very quick to withdraw from that company because they don't want to be associated with companies that do not comply, especially on the legal side. So if I go and audit and legally our supplier or our service provider is not complying to the law, companies now withdraw their account and they find another company that can assist them with those services. So legal, we cannot compromise legal. There's a reason why things are mentioned in the acts and in the regulation, right? And then The last part of the PDCA cycle, which is applicable, remember, to both standards, is now the A, where we have found gaps in the audits, in the checklist. Now we act, we correct the non-conformity or the non-conformance that has been raised. That's the A now in the PDCA cycle. We are now acting to correct the wrong that has been identified or the gap that has been identified in the audit. And then after planning, we have support, clause 7. It goes back to management now. Clause 7 and clause 5 speak to each other. Remember, clause 5 was leadership. And remember, I said, when we audit, we say, Mr. MD, how do you support the organization to maintain these ISO management systems? And then clause 7 says, management must make sure that people are trained. You cannot be put as a SHEQ manager and yet you've never been exposed to environmental, you've never been exposed to health and safety. Then what do you do? What do you manage? You know, it's important that you have the skill. You've done the training and you have some experience, especially if you are going to be appointed at a higher level. You must have the competency to do what you need to do. And we always say you must be a subject matter expert. You must know what needs to be done. Otherwise, then how are you going to lead the whole organization? So management must support. Whenever there is a change, management must make sure that the SHEQ person, the environmental person, or the HSE person goes for the updated training. Like now with the new standard, a lot of people had to now move from the old standard in health and safety. It was OSHA's 18001. Now there's ISO 45001. So a lot of professionals had to go and now study the ISO 45001 and understand what it requires. Same with 14001, the environmental standard. When there was a change to the 2015 standard, we had to go and do training so that we now understand the requirements of the new 2015 environmental standard. And then operations, clause 8, operations looks at your activity. What does it goes back now to the context of the organization, clause 4. What does the organization do? So in operations, we look at your operational activities. On the environmental side, we look at the waste. We look at the working environment, the factory, the workshop. Have you done hygiene surveys? What were the results of the surveys? The lacks of the lighting in the workshop. Is the lighting sufficient enough? That's all part of environment. And then on the health and safety side, also on the operational, we look now at the safety of the people who are conducting those activities operational. Are they safe? Are they working safely? Do machines have guards? On the health side, let me give an example of a spray painter. How often does your spray painter go for medical? How do you ensure that he doesn't inhale all these fumes when he's spray painting? I know big companies would have wellness days where they call medical companies to come and give health talks. Stress is a big factor because when you are stressed, you can cause an injury on the floor because you are not 100% there. You are thinking of other things that are stressing. We speak to stress as well. How do you control? How do you help your employees when they are going through things? Currently, mental health is a big issue. After COVID, mental health became a huge issue for organizations. How are you helping your employees with mental health issues? I recently audited a company that released somebody. Basically, they were fired because of mental health issues. And that's not legal. That's very illegal. So I said, okay, so before we got to the firing, let's go back to the basic conditions of employment act. How did you help this employee? HR, what do your procedures say about mental health? Now we look for mental health processes from HR, because mental health is a big thing. People, we see a goisha. That's what we say. So HR has to take care of their people on the mental health side of things. You can't just fire a person because maya goisha. No, you can't. There's processes you have to follow. You have to help them. You have to do this. You have to do this until, some do come out of it, some can't. But then if they can't, it's not just firing immediately. No, there's legal routes that you have to take before you get to the final step of releasing the person. You can move them to light duty. It's a heavy engineering company. You can say, okay, whilst you're going through this, let's move you to light duty, maybe for 6 weeks or whatever period, and see how you do. So firing is like the last thing they can do. And before they get to that, there's a whole lot of processes that they have to follow. So we look at all those things when we audit. So operations in ISO 45001, we look at the safety of the people who are offering the organization their services to do this. We look at machines, we look at their training. Are the crane operators trained? Are the forklift operators trained? Are they following the training? And now and again, and I love doing this when I audit companies, they park the forklift there because they are in a hurry to get another load, and I just lock it and take the key with me because they're not supposed to leave the key in the forklift. You don't leave a key in your car, That's just me teaching them that you can't leave a key here, remove the key. So we look at all those things when we audit. That's operation. And then clause 9 is performance evaluation. That's when now the business decides what are we going to monitor as a business, right? So the clause, I think it's monitoring, evaluation, it's 4 things. So the company will say, what are we going to monitor as an organization? In health and safety, we can monitor our lost time injury. In the past 12 months, how many injuries were LTIs, were lost time? Why were they lost time? And the nice thing now with these new standards in ISO 45001, when you get to clause 10 in the non-conformances, the standard now forces you to do a root cause analysis. Before, we didn't have to do a root cause. Before you were injured, you fill in the incident form. Okay, please, let's make sure that it doesn't happen again. We didn't sit and sit with the team to do the root cause. What caused this accident? There's different methodologies you can use. There's the 5 Ys, there's the 8 Ds, there's the Ishikawa, the fishbone. There's a whole lot of methodologies you can use for finding the root cause of the problem. Again, that's another new thing in the new standard. Before, we had corrections and preventative action. Now, preventative is no longer an issue with the new standard. Now they want you to, once there's been an incident or an accident, they want you to do a root cause, identify the root cause of the problem, and then prevent it from happening again. That was another big change with the new standard. So those are the 10 clauses. Most of them interlink between environmental and health and safety. Most of them speak to each other, except for the aspects and impacts on the environmental side and the risk assessments on the occupational health and safety side, and your incidences on the environmental side and your incidences on the health and safety side. Otherwise, all the other clauses are the same. Hence, companies integrate their procedures. They don't have environmental procedures and OHS procedures. You can integrate and have one procedure for the context of the organization, one procedure for your non-conformances, your NCRs, one procedure for your internal audit. The only differences are now the accidents and incidents on the health and safety side, your risk assessments on the health and safety side, and then on the environmental side, and legal on the health and safety side. And then on the environmental, there is also legal. And then you also have your aspect and impact. That was a mouthful. I hope.
Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I think that you covered all of the important elements there, and I'm sure those in the community that are watching, that felt like a basic awareness on both ISO and ISO 45000. I think you should actually send an invoice. So anyone that watches this, you should send an invoice. Thank you. Thanks a lot for that answer. It was quite comprehensive. I just want to take you back because the one thing I've found, this is now from when I started in EHS back in 2013, and having spent time speaking to a lot of people in the EHS community, whether this is being online or in person, a lot of people struggle with getting management support. But they don't know how to either approach management to convince them to give them the support, whether that being financial or in terms of resources. Can we just unpack that clause? Because I don't want us to go forward without actually looking into that clause. Like when you go and audit a supplier or an organization, what is best practice for you? What do you actually want to see in order to say, here EHS is taken seriously by management? What are the best practices? If you can unpack those points for us, what do you actually look for, or what would you like to see from an organization when you look at that leadership and management commitment clause?
Okay, good question. We've already spoken to management review, right? Their attendance rate, I don't compromise that. The MD, the big gun must be there. That's one. Two, we look at, I always ask management, why did they want to be certified? I always ask that question. Because if they were just instructed by one of their customers to get certified, then they won't be committed to that because they have no clue. Instead, they'll shift everything to the HSE department. So it's crucial that, and there is top management training. We always look at that as well. Have they done legal compliance where we speak to them about their liability? We tell them what the Occupational Health and Safety Act says. They can be fined. They can be jailed. There's a few cases of CEOs sitting in jail now. Top management has always been an issue. Bona, they just want to make money. And they don't understand that these systems actually make money for the company. I don't know. Yeah, they don't get that. And yet these systems make money. 45,001, the lesser accidents you have, the safer the workspace, the more production you have. And the more production you have, the more the growth of the business. Environmentally, if you take care of your environmental impacts as the MD, chances of you being fined by the Department of Environmental Affairs, chances of you being arrested by Environmental Affairs are very minimal. So I always say to management, yes, we don't make hard cash like sale, but our contribution to the business is indirect. We indirectly influence the outcome of the final product to your customer. So yes, your customer has placed an order for 10 million. Who's going to do that? It's the people on the floor. Who's going to make sure that that item bought by your customer conforms to the requirement? It's the people on the floor. How do people make sure that they conform to the customer requirement? Are the people working safely? Are they healthy? Do you do your medical once a year?
I love that answer. Also, all the points that you mentioned, you can even use the community can use that as a checklist to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've taken care of this and this. So thank you for that answer. It makes it a lot easier. So I just want us to unpack this again. I just want to stick to this one because it's a crucial point for those in EHS. So you had mentioned when you come to audit Litemba's organization, I am the EHS on site. We are now looking at the leadership and management commitment clause, right? You then say, okay, I'm auditing this clause. You have already done the interview with the site manager, operations manager, or whatever the title is. You then also look at the management review meetings. Can you maybe give us 2 other things that you look for that will make you happy in terms of that management commitment is there on site? What else will you look at from management, something that will prove that management is committed in that particular organization?
I would look also at who signed the EHS policy. There was a big debate in an audit I did last week. A policy is a high-level document. Not anyone can sign a policy. It's the big guy who signs that policy. Why? Because he commits. He's committing himself and his team, his 16.2s and the 8.1s and all those people. They are committing to a safe and healthy working environment for the people. And on the environmental side, they are committing to taking care of the environment, to minimizing their impact on the environment, to complying to legal and other requirements. So the documentation and the signing of the policy, we still find the supervisors signing the policy. And it cannot be. It cannot be. It is the MD who signs the policy. Again, it's the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding, you know. We find the ops manager signing the policy. No, it's the head of the business that must sign policy, because he is responsible and accountable. Should anything happen, he is accountable. So the signing of the policy says to us, he is accepting the accountability. Yes, he can appoint the 16.2s, he can appoint whoever he wants to appoint, but at the end of the day, everything comes back to him as the CEO or as the MD of the organization. The accountability, he cannot transfer that to the appointee. The accountability stays with him. When he appoints the 16.2s and the 8.1s and all these people, then he is giving them certain responsibility. But the accountability, he cannot transfer that. That stays with the MD or the CEO. So it's important that policy, the HSE policy, is signed by the MD, not the manager, not the ops manager. The managing director must sign that policy. Another thing we look at in the management review to see if management commitment is the risk. When we reviewed the risks in the management review, because one of the inputs of the review meeting are the risks. Management, the management commitment, the risks that have been identified, the hazards that have been identified, their risks and their mitigation. What does the minutes of the review say? How did management speak to those risks? I'll give you an example. Maybe, what's an easy example? Maybe we have decided that we're going to extend our factory, for an example. That extension comes with construction. That construction increases the risk, right? So if that point is in the risk assessment, then in the management review, when we review the risks, management says, yes, we are starting with a extension of the workshop on the 2nd of January 2024. What risks have been identified now that we are going for the extension of our factory or our workshop? What do we need to make sure that this extension is safe for our employees? Then management comes in. What resources is management going to provide now based on this extension of the premises? It can be financial, it can be human resources. Is management willing to appoint a professional construction company to come and extend the factory? That's management. Because procurement can't appoint, the procurement can find 3 companies as per their purchasing process, but who makes the final decision? It's the procurement manager and top management to say, okay, we'll go for this company because of 1, 2, 3. There they are showing their commitment. And if that is documented that must be communicated in the management review minute. We would have known from the opening meeting or from the top management interview that there is a plan to extend premises. And immediately, now you know what to look for. Was this discussed? Where is the planning? Was it discussed as part of the management review meeting? What risks have been identified? Now with the contractor coming in to do the extension, there's definitely risks with construction or extending. And what is management? How is management going to support the organization to make sure that the extension takes place safely, environmental is not compromised, and all those things. So we would look at risks as well, how management identified the risks. And then we would look at objectives and targets. Those objectives, and remember, when we set objectives based on the overall strategic direction of the business, right? Every business has a strategy. Every business wants growth. They want more business. They want more this. They want more this. So every objective we set must be linked to the strategic direction of the business, right? So when we set environmental or OHS objectives and targets, those objectives and targets must speak to the direction of the business. For an example, we set a target to say on the health and safety side, we want to, which is a standard, we want to decrease our lost time injuries, or we want zero lost time injuries. So we want to minimize our lost time injuries, or maybe last year we had 10 lost time injuries, and then we refer to that. Okay. So objectives, we look at objectives and targets. Now, when we set objectives and targets departmentally or as a SHEQ department, usually those objectives and targets link to the strategic objectives and targets of the business. So top management set their objectives and targets as top management, and then they filter down now to the different departments. Top management on the environmental side, they can say, we want to start measuring our CO2 emission, right? Yeah, there's different ways you can monitor your CO2 emissions. Then top management will say, we've set that as a company environmental objective to monitor and measure our CO2 emission. Now, how are we contributing to these CO2 emissions? This is now top management. We have company vehicles. How many people are using company vehicles? Because that diesel is affecting the CO2. There's a lot of traveling, flying. Flying affects the CO2 emission. The use of diesel. Maybe we have processes where we use diesel and petrol. That diesel and petrol affects your CO2 emission. Now that's set at a higher level. Now it must filter down to the organization. And then the sales department, now the sales manager takes that big CO2 emission objective set at top management level to the sales department to say, okay, sales, how many salespeople use company vehicles? Okay, we have 20. How often do you visit? How often do you visit customers, blah, blah, blah. And then they might change and say, okay, you 20 salespeople that are using 20 vehicles, our CO2 emissions from these 20 vehicles are high. The petrol, the diesel that we use is high. How about we cut 20 vehicles maybe to 15, for an example? Or we still keep it at 20, but instead of doing one trip and coming back and doing one trip and coming back, if you can maybe do 3 trips a day where your customers are in close vicinity. These things come to us and we have no clue how they are decided. Do you understand? So they come from the top and then they filter down to the department And then the sales manager sits with the sales guys and says, hey, guys, there's a lot of traveling we are doing. We are spending a lot of money on petrol. We are spending a lot of money, or we are negatively affecting the environment. Now that we are ISO 14001 certified, let's relook at our visit. Instead of just going to Germiston and coming back, and then tomorrow you go to Brakpan, you come back, and then tomorrow you go to Boxback, you come back. You can do all these trips in one day because Brakpan, Germiston, Springs, So, and then the manager would say, Mr. Sales, please, if you are visiting the East Rand, can you at least make 4 trips or visit 4 customers instead of visiting 1 customer a day? That is contributing to our CO2 emission. That is decreasing our CO2 emission as per the objectives set by top management. Now it's filtering down to the department. I don't know if it's making sense. Yeah.
It does. No, thank you. Because you just made me think of F1. So I follow F1 a lot, Formula One. And I know there's been this big drive. I think it's goal 2030, reducing greenhouse gases and carbon emissions by 2030. So they were even looking at their schedule, how they hold the races, because I'm not sure how many countries they hold these races within the Formula One calendar. So they were saying they are now looking at, for example, they would go and race in Europe 1 week, 2 weeks later they leave there. For example, they go to Saudi Arabia. All right. And then after that, they go, I'm using an example. I'm hoping this race is on the calendar, but South Africa is currently on the calendar. So it's Europe, Saudi Arabia, then they come to South Africa. Then after that, they go to Australia. So they were saying, but guys, in order to reduce our greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, why don't you say, so we're going to have a block for the month of May, all our races are going to happen in Europe. We'll do all of the races in Europe. Maybe they have seven races in Europe. Let's bunch those together as much as possible, of course, because sponsors play a crucial role. They want races within a particular time period also. So let's group the ones in Europe. Let's do those. When we're done, let's group the ones in Asia. Do all of those together. And you can imagine it will be a massive saving there, a massive reduction rather. So I like the example you gave. It's very practical. And even those in the community that are listening, it's an easy, okay, not easy, but the example you gave is easily understandable. And the guys can quickly implement that. Even when they go and sell it to management, it's a perfect example. I love it because they'll go to management and it's something that's happening on site. They might have a fleet of trucks that deliver goods, for example. Then say, guys, let's group Germiston. I see there's 2 customers have ordered from Germiston. Can you not then group those? When the van leaves site, it goes and drops and does those deliveries.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I love the example you just gave. Straight to the point and easy to understand. Thanks again there.
I know I talk too much, so
I love it. I'm learning a lot.